2 o'clock in the afternoon, broad daylight, a narrow alley in East London, a street you walk past without thinking twice. But on this afternoon, everything was caught on camera, and what those cameras recorded would end up replayed in a courtroom, dissected by lawyers, debated by a jury, and eventually challenged all the way to the Court of Appeal. Before any of that happened, a 22-year-old man left his house, said a prayer before he walked out the door, and never came back. Two men crossed paths in that alley, both armed, both knew what was coming. Only one walked away, and the question that haunted every courtroom this case passed through was not who did it. The cameras already answered that. The question was, what exactly did he intend? Stay with me, because the answer is not as simple as it sounds. Now, let's talk about where this story begins. Hackney, East London, December 2019. To understand what happened on that afternoon, you need to understand the postcode first. Because in Hackney, postcodes aren't just addresses, they mean something. The Pembury estate sits in Lower Clapton, a tight cluster of residential blocks that for years had been associated with one name, the Pembury Boys, a street gang with deep roots in that area. Deep enough that growing up there meant you already knew who they were, whether you wanted to or not. Their territory, their rules, and their disputes had a way of following people into moments that couldn't be undone. His name was Exorson Gimby, 22 years old, from Hackney. He was an Arsenal fan. He had two younger sisters he absolutely doted on, and his partner was pregnant. He was months away from becoming a father for the first time. His mother said that, at the vigil, standing in the same alley where her son had died, she told anyone who would listen. The last thing he did before he went out was say a prayer. She called him a good boy, and then she said something that stayed with me. It's not fair. Just that. 3 words. Because what else is there to say? Now, Exors had history. He was known to police. He moved in circles that carried risk. But by December 2019, people close to him said he was trying to step back, trying to be present for the baby that was coming, trying. And then there's the detail that makes this story even harder to sit with. 8 months earlier, April 2019, Exors's cousin, Calvin Bungisa, was stabbed to death in Kentish Town. Calvin was also 22. Same year, same family, 2 young men, 2 funerals. The same mother who buried a nephew in April was now standing over her son in December. Now, the other man is Kieran Brown, 27 years old at the time. Mabley Street, Hackney, a few minutes' walk from the Pembury estate. He wasn't an outsider to that world. That's the thing people miss when they first hear this case. Brown wasn't some stranger who wandered into the wrong postcode. He knew that estate. He knew those streets. He had history there, drug dealing, prior convictions for weapons, prior convictions for violence. The sentencing judge would later describe him as someone with a willingness to use violence. Now, his relationship with the Pembury Boys. It's complicated, because Brown wasn't always their enemy. At some point, these circles had overlapped. Former associates, men who knew each other's faces, each other's names. And somewhere along the way, that familiarity curdled into something else. A rivalry, a grudge that doesn't get resolved with words. The day before the killing, December 4th, Brown and Exors had already fought. A physical altercation, no serious injuries, nobody hospitalized, but nobody satisfied either. The score was not settled, and Brown knew it. Exors knew it. Both men went home that night knowing this wasn't over. December 5th, 2019, a Thursday afternoon. Clarence Mews, a narrow alley near the Pembury estate. Not a busy road, not a public square, just a quiet cut-through with cameras. And those cameras recorded everything. Brown emerged from the estate first, moving through the alley. Then he saw him, Exors, on his bicycle. They clocked each other. That moment, that split second of recognition, both men knew exactly who they were looking at. Brown kept moving, stepped into a nearby shop. Just for a moment. The knife was already inside his coat. He came back out, and now the body language had shifted. Tense, deliberate. Exors hadn't left. He stayed on his bike, keeping distance, watching. He knew something was wrong. You could see it in the way he moved, cautious, circling, never fully turning his back. Then Brown reached into his coat, checking the blade was there. Then he stopped, turned, and the coat fell open. The knife, visible now. No more pretending this was just 2 men crossing paths. Exors dismounted the bike, and from somewhere on his person, he produced a sword, 46 centimeters long. Both men armed, both standing in a narrow alley, in broad daylight, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. They clashed. Then, Brown pulled back a few steps, and for one moment, it looked like it might be over. It wasn't. Exors cycled after him. The fight resumed, and then Exors fell, down, on the ground, and Brown did not stop. 8 stab wounds, delivered in seconds. Not 1, not 2, 8. 3 of them pierced the heart, severed arteries. The force broke bone, broke cartilage. Brown ran, the knife still visible as he fled, captured on camera. All of it. Exors's associates, the men who had been standing nearby watching, left, without helping, without calling for help, without a word. The street went quiet. The ambulance came. Paramedics worked on him right there in the alley, but the wounds were too deep. At 2:30 p.m., Exhaust Nimby was pronounced dead at the scene. 22 years old, a man who had said a prayer before he left the house, gone. Brown was arrested later that same day, hours after Exhaust was pronounced dead in that alley. And when police sat down with him, he had something prepared. Not an off-the-cuff explanation, a prepared statement, carefully worded. His version of events was this. He had been surrounded, outnumbered, armed attackers closing in from every direction. He panicked. He disarmed Exhaust, took the sword from him mid-struggle, and everything that followed was survival. Kill or be killed, his words. Then came the questions, the specific ones, the ones detectives ask when they want detail, consistency, truth. And on those questions, Brown said nothing, no comment. The prosecution noted every single one. Because silence in a police interview isn't neutral. But here's where it gets complicated. Forensics. Brown's DNA was found on the blade of Exhaust's sword, not the handle, the blade. The defense seized on that immediately. It supported the disarming claim, they argued. Brown had physically grabbed the blade during the struggle, which meant contact, which meant chaos, which meant maybe things weren't as one-sided as the CCTV suggested. Maybe the trial was held at Harrow Crown Court, 2020, nearly a year after Exhaust died in that alley, and both sides came with a clear, specific argument. The prosecution went first, and their position was simple. This was not panic. This was not a man who stumbled into danger and reacted on instinct. This was revenge. Brown armed himself before he left. He saw Exhaust, entered that shop, composed himself, and came back out ready. He initiated. And when Exhaust fell, Brown kept going. 8 wounds on a man already on the ground, already no longer a threat. The CCTV showed all of it. The defense had one answer to all of that. He had no choice. Surrounded by armed men. No way out. No time to think. Everything that happened in that alley was instinct, not intent. And without intent, there is no murder. Then came a moment that didn't involve any words at all. Exhaust's associates, the men who had stood in that alley and watched, not one of them testified, not one. The prosecution addressed it directly. They called it a powerful silent statement about street loyalties. And they were right, because silence in a courtroom, when you were a witness to a killing, says everything. November 19th, 2020. The jury came back, not guilty of murder, the specific intent to kill or to cause really serious harm, not proven beyond reasonable doubt, guilty of manslaughter. November 26th, 2020, 1 week after the verdict, Brown stood for sentencing, and Judge Dean didn't hold back. She made a formal finding that Kieran Brown was a dangerous offender. That's not a casual label. In English law, that finding unlocks extended sentencing powers. It means the court believes this person poses a significant risk of serious harm to the public in the future, not just in the past. The sentence, 15 years in custody, 3 years extended license on top of that, 18 years total, plus a concurrent 2 years and 6 months for the blade offense. The judge walked through why. He had armed himself unlawfully before the confrontation. He had provoked it. His history, drug dealing, weapons, violence, painted a picture of a man who had been moving towards something like this for a long time. A standard sentence, she said, would not be enough, not for public protection. Brown's legal team appealed on 2 grounds. First, the conviction itself. They argued that given the size of the knife and the fatal nature of the wounds, the only logical verdicts were murder or full acquittal. There was no rational middle ground, they said. Manslaughter made no sense. Second, the sentence. 15 years, they argued, was excessive. November 4th, 2021. The Court of Appeal considered both arguments and refused both. On the conviction, the court was clear. Intent is always a question for the jury. Always. And here's the part that stings a little, legally speaking. Brown himself denied having murderous intent. That was his defense. I didn't mean to kill him. I was just trying to survive. The jury heard that and believed him on that specific point. They concluded he lacked the intent for murder, so they convicted him of the next thing down, manslaughter. The Court of Appeal's response to his lawyers was essentially this: you cannot argue that your client lacked murderous intent to escape a murder conviction, and then turn around and complain that the jury took you at your word. The conviction stood, the sentence stood. Brown versus R. 2021, EWCA Crim 1764, case closed. Here's what stays with me about this case, not the verdict, not the legal arguments, not the appeal. What stays with me is the speed of it. One day, 2 men have a fight. Nobody dies. Nobody is seriously hurt. The next day, one of them is dead in an alley, and a family that had already buried a 22-year-old that same year was burying another one. That's how fast it moves. That's how little time there is between a grudge and a grave. Exhaust's partner was pregnant. That child came into the world without a father. His 2 younger sisters lost their brother. His mother lost her son 8 months after losing her nephew. Same family, same year. The cameras captured everything, every movement, every choice, every second of those final moments. And that footage became the spine of the entire prosecution. No eyewitness testimony, no cooperation from anyone on that street, just the cameras, telling the truth when no one else would. This case now sits in legal literature, cited in discussions about self-defense, about mutual combat, about where the law draws the line between a man protecting himself and a man crossing into something unforgivable. It's not a clean line. It never is. But the courts drew it here, and 18 years was the answer. Exorce's mother stood in that alley the night her son died, surrounded by family, and she said, "Enough is enough. Our family is hurting so much." Not anger, not a speech, just a mother. Exhausted, broken, telling the truth. That's what this case is, underneath all the legal language and the court dates and the appeal judgments. A mother, standing where her son fell, saying enough. If this case touched you, share it. These stories deserve to be heard. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is a good time. See you in the next one.